Okay, let's dive right into this. Have you ever found yourself stuck in what feels like life's ultimate waiting room? You know the feeling, right? You're standing on the very edge of a massive transition, a monumental life threshold, but you just aren't there yet. It's like you're paused. Well, today we are looking at a fascinating geographical and spiritual location that perfectly captures this exact feeling. It's a place called Shittim. Throughout this explainer, we're going to explore how this ancient encampment served as the dramatic final waiting room for the Israelites, and how its legacy eventually transformed into a stunning symbol of an overflowing fountain. First up, let's look at what the word actually means. The term Shittim, or sometimes you'll hear Abel Shittim, is just a transliteration of the Hebrew word for acacia trees. So, literally translated, it means the meadow or the stream of the acacias. That paints a really lovely, tranquil picture, doesn't it? Just a peaceful meadow shaded by some acacia branches. But as we're about to see, this location east of the Jordan River was anything but peaceful. It actually became this incredibly intense staging ground for a nation going through a historic transition. Section 1. The Meadow of Acacias, the final encampment. To get our bearings, let's picture the geography here. Shittim is located right in the plains of Moab, acting as the absolute last rest stop before crossing the Jordan River. And this setup brilliantly illustrates the sheer psychological weight of where they were. Over on the east side of the Jordan, that's their current reality. We're talking decades of wandering around in the harsh wilderness, living as nomads. But directly across the water to the west, that's Canaan, the literal promised land. Try to imagine the palpable tension buzzing through that encampment. Israel actually stayed at Shittim for a really long time before traversing into Canaan. You can almost feel what it's like to be stuck in a prolonged period of waiting, staring right at the finish line, but not yet allowed to cross it. Section 2, Tragedy and Triumph, Drama in the Waiting Room. Because the Israelites were stuck here for so long, this waiting room turned into a total pressure cooker of incredible highs and devastating lows. It's wild how much history happened on this specific patch of dirt. Right off the bat, there's this intense, unseen spiritual battle. As the encampment at Shittim begins, wrapping up their 40-year journey, the local rulers start panicking. King Balak of Moab gets so nervous that he actually hires Balaam, a well-known pagan seer, specifically to curse the people of God and stop them from entering Canaan. But then, a literal miracle happens out on the road. Balaam's own donkey intervenes, speaking right to him to stop him from defying God. By the final day of this whole ordeal, instead of cursing the Israelites, Balaam opens his mouth and ends up pronouncing a massive divine blessing over the nation. It's such an incredible story because it shows how God was actively protecting them from curses while they were literally just sitting around waiting in their tents. So the crucial point is this. While God is up on the mountaintops turning curses into blessings, the Israelites down in the valley at Shittim are tragically sabotaging the whole thing. They allowed themselves to be enticed into idolatrous Baal worship. They engaged in immoral sexual relations with the local Moabite and Midianite women. Basically, right after being divinely protected and blessed, they completely turned their backs on the very God protecting them, provoking his fierce anger through their unfaithfulness. And the fallout from that unfaithfulness was absolutely severe. 24,000. That's how many men lost their lives to a plague sent by the Lord because of their idolatry and immorality as Shittim. It's a deeply sobering reality, isn't it? Right on the very precipice of entering the Promised Land, this massive, devastating tragedy strikes the camp, and it was entirely due to their own self-inflicted rebellion. It was, without a doubt, a very dark day in the waiting room. But, the story of Shittim doesn't just end in tragedy. They had to bounce back. And they actually did. First things first, to prep for finally entering Canaan, a brand new tribe-by-tribe census was taken of all the men ready for battle. Next up, they reorganized their troops, turning Shittim into their central military headquarters. And finally, they marched out and successfully defeated the Midianites. They regrouped, they refocused, and they transformed their place of utter failure into a staging ground for victory. Let's move to Section 3 and see how this builds. Passing the torch, a new generation rises. You see, Shittim wasn't just a place for military reorganization. It was the site of a monumental leadership change. The generation that had wandered the wilderness was passing away, and an entirely new generation was stepping up to claim the promise. Talk about a rapid-fire succession of events that finally pushed the nation out of that waiting room. Right there in Shittim, the great Moses delivers his epic farewell speech and his final blessing to the people, which is the text we now know as the Book of Deuteronomy. Right after that, Joshua is officially declared as Moses' successor. The mantle is completely passed. Joshua then takes immediate action, secretly sending 2 spies straight from Shittim to scout out the formidable city of Jericho. And then, finally, the moment they had been waiting decades for, the miraculous journey begins as the Ark of the Covenant leads the people out of Shittim and straight into the waters of the Jordan River. This whole transition was so powerful, so miraculous, that it was permanently etched into their national memory forever. I mean, centuries later, the prophet Micah was still telling the people to never forget it. Look at this quote with me. "My people, remember your journey from Shittim to Gilgal, that you may know the righteous acts of the Lord." Shittim to Gilgal, from that final encampment on the east, straight through the parted waters of the Jordan to the very first encampment on the west. It became the ultimate historical touchstone of God's faithfulness to his promises. Now let's slow things down just a bit as we transition into Section 4, the prophetic valley, from history to metaphor. The actual physical history of Shittim was so deeply embedded in the biblical consciousness that later writers actually started using it as this profound poetic symbol. We see this shift most clearly in the prophetic book of Joel. He's casting this grand vision of a future restoration, and he drops in this incredibly mysterious, beautiful line, "And a fountain shall come forth from the house of the Lord and water the valley of Shittim." This introduces such a fascinating image, doesn't it? A future valley receiving miraculous, life-giving water bubbling up directly from a spring inside the temple. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that it sets up a bit of a geographical puzzle. On the one hand, we have the literal Shittim we've been talking about, east of the Jordan, that gritty historical campsite. But on the other hand, we have Joel's symbolic Shittim. Because the water in Joel's prophecy flows from the temple in Jerusalem, scholars note that this specific valley would actually have to be west of the Jordan. Many believe Joel might be referencing Wadi an-Nar, which is this really dry, harsh wilderness valley near the Dead Sea where, you guessed it, acacia trees grow in abundance. But going way beyond just geography, most scholars agree this is a powerful, totally symbolic reference. Joel was basically announcing that the water of life, the gospel of grace, would bring absolute newness to a desolate, dying world. It's widely viewed as a messianic picture, where Christ himself is that life-giving fountain flowing out from the house of the Lord. The implication here is huge. It means these flowing streams of living water won't just stay bottled up in the temple. They're going to reach far and wide, flowing to the Gentiles and out to the most remote, bone-dry regions of the world. It is the ultimate promise that God's grace is an overflowing fountain that will never, ever run dry. So we've traveled from a very literal, dusty waiting room filled with both massive failures and incredible triumphs, all the way to this gorgeous prophetic vision of grace watering the driest deserts. And as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this question to chew on. What is the Shittim in your life right now? Are you in a season of waiting, maybe a tough season of preparation, a prolonged transition where you are staring right at a promise you haven't yet crossed into? Just remember that even in the longest waiting rooms, and yeah, even amidst our own failures, God is actively working behind the scenes. He's preparing a way, and he promises to send his overflowing grace to water your dry valleys. Thanks so much for diving into this with me today. Keep learning, keep growing, and I'll see you next time.